So I've only recently entered the VC space, under a year, and I've mainly come from tech startup world in the last decade or so. But in the last few years, I've actually been researching a lot about the historical VC funding, especially in North America. And there's going to be one report that I'm going to cite. It came out last year called the Diversity in Startups report that came out of Morgan Stanley. And it scrutinized the top 100 VC firms, which accounted for almost $6 to $8 billion in funding in over, I think, 3,300 companies. The upshot of the report was that VC-backed startups significantly were male. That was 90%. 72% were white. 35% were based in Silicon Valley, and 14% were Ivy-educated founders. So they cited that some of the issues with respect to lack of representative investment in women as well as racialized founders was that while many of the investors perceived the funding landscape to be balanced, their actual investments in these multicultural and women-owned businesses were highly skewed. So investors, for the most part, couldn't see over this risk wall. And they increase the risk wall for racialized as well as women-based founders was twice as high than white males. There's also this lack of access. Investors who say they frequently review all businesses equally actually only reviewed businesses from women 17% of the time, and for minorities 18% of the time. From a male perspective, it was almost 50%. And so there's this other area that I want to focus on a little bit. It's called lack of familiarity. A lot of investors who say that they invest in sectors as a compelling driver to traditional businesses, in fact, only defaulted to traditional businesses run by males 46% of the time. And for women, it was almost only 30%, and minority founders 33%. So when we talk about racialized and women-owned controlled businesses, they could account for $6.8 trillion in gross receipts if we start matching the percentage of labor as well as the business revenues that were equal to these traditionally male-founded, male-invested businesses. And that is equivalent to a missed opportunity of almost $4.4 trillion. So what this revealed is that there's actually not a pipeline problem, as much as people want to say that. There is no lack of talent in these underrepresented communities. Much of the issue is about access, and there's been a lot of reference and literature talked about where VCs have invested in communities within their own communities and people who look like them. And then when they talk about solving problems, they solve problems based on what they determine as the definition of mainstream. And so I've done a lot of research in AI when it comes to systemic bias, and this is indicative of what that is. This largely ignores a lot of the problems or issues that are already being addressed outside of these bubbles. And they may be endemic to some of these outside communities, but they haven't been thought through or even considered among Silicon Valley-based or Ivy-educated startups. So when it comes to investing in companies, VCs often say that these companies are not the right fit, and that actually belies the very environment that they're in, because there is a claim for market-related issues, but often it's really about the fact that they're not familiar with that market rather than there's not a market available. So every VC has their own strategy and investment criteria when it comes to determining the right fit for their portfolio. And so there's this evolving concept of fit has to also take a look at those that are outside of the sectors. And evolving sectors, evolving markets, geographies, we typically bring in people who are subject matter experts in those areas. And so when it comes to companies and products that are run by these underestimated entrepreneurs that address a market deficiency or a need that they've identified, it's based on personal experience. And this is exactly the type of calculated, I would say, expansion risk that VCs have to consider, because there's an overwhelming amount of VCs that were surveyed that actually say that, someone's lived experience, it poses a competitive advantage in determining a market problem that needs to be solved. So VCs likely aren't educating themselves, or they've become complacent in the, in the environment that they live.